Monday to Friday at 8:30 on ViuTVSix.
And welcome back now to another important election, this time closer to home. South Koreans are choosing their president tomorrow after ousted leader Park Geun-hye's falls from grace. Here's Dan Epstein to tell us who might end up leading the country.
This Tuesday, South Koreans take to the polls in a snap election which will decide who replaces the ousted president Park Geun-hye. Now let's take a look at the top candidates. Leading the polls with over 40% of the votes is former human rights lawyer Moon Jae-in. Unlike his more conservative rivals, he's not afraid of distancing South Korea from the U.S. He believes the key to handling North Korea is with dialogue and investment, but his opponents have criticized him for being too soft on North Korea. Someone expected to be a lot friendlier towards the US is Ahn Cheol-soo. He in fact has a lot in common with President Trump. They both come from well-connected families. They both are business moguls. He says that he's the only candidate able to galvanize the South Korean economy by ushering in a fourth industrial revolution. The most controversial candidate may be Hong Joon-pyo, who bills himself as the true conservative vote. He says that should he be elected, he'll order the first executions the country's seen in 2 decades. Some have likened his rhetoric to that of Donald Trump.
For more on tomorrow's elections in South Korea, here's Seoul correspondent Joseph Kim.
Just ahead of the presidential elections in South Korea, there's a growing anticipation, a fervor that change is on the horizon following one of the biggest corruption scandals the country has witnessed. And it's showing in the polls with over 10 million utilizing the early voting system, while pollsters suggest that these early figures could indicate an overall voter turnout rate of over 90%. More are getting involved to usher in a new Korea. But the new president will have many challenges, including reforming the political system, which has been left without a president for months following the impeachment of Park Geun-hye. They will also be tasked with boosting the lagging economy, with a growing youth unemployment problem, and mitigate the tensions with North Korea. All will be priorities for the new president, who will burden the hopes and demands for change that have burned in the streets of Seoul and across the nation.
Well, of course, one of the major sticking points in the South Korean election is how the country should deal with its neighbors in the north. It comes as Pyongyang announced it detained another U.S. citizen on suspicion of hostile acts against the state. Chris Dignam reports.
North Korea's state-run news agency on Sunday saying the country has detained another U.S. citizen, an employee of the Pyongyang University of Science and Technology. North Korea saying only that Kim Hak-song was arrested on suspicion of acts against the state, offering no other details. If confirmed, he would be the 4th U.S. citizen to be held in the Hermit Kingdom, and the 2nd American who worked for the university, which was founded by evangelical Christians, to be detained in the last few weeks. In January of last year, a 22-year-old American student was detained and later sentenced to 15 years hard labor for trying to steal a propaganda banner. 2 months later, a 62-year-old Korean-American missionary was given 10 years hard labor for subversion. The 2 more recent arrests come amid escalated tensions between North Korea and the United States. But last week, Donald Trump said he'd be honored to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un under the right circumstances and offered praise for the dictator.
U.S. and Afghan officials confirmed that the head of Islamic State in Afghanistan was killed in an operation in April. Abdul Hasib was accused of being behind a series of deadly attacks. The confirmation of his death comes after a joint raid in the eastern province of Nangarhar last month. The attack saw more than 30 IS fighters and high-ranking commanders killed, along with 2 U.S. Army Rangers. 7 Chinese vessels have been detained by West African countries for illegal fishing in nearby waters. Greenpeace and government officials said the boat owners could be subject to millions of US dollars in fines for catching protected fish, including sharks, and using nets with small holes. Inspectors from Guinea and Sierra Leone found carcasses of several shark species in freezers aboard. They also found bagfuls of shark fins and manta rays. Some of the ships were released after fines were paid. Others remain under investigation.
We have only been out at sea for 20 days to do joint surveillance work, and in those 20 days we have been finding 13 fishing vessels with infractions. And if you also think about the fact that there are many of those vessels knowing that we are patrolling together with surveillance authorities, we are still able to find all these infractions.
A group of 82 girls held captive for 3 years have returned to their families. The students met Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari a day after they were released by Islamic militants before being reunited with their families. The government secured the release in exchange for 3 militant commanders. The girls were among a group of 270 school children kidnapped in April 2014 by militant group Boko Haram. Boko Haram has waged an 8-year-old insurgency to create an Islamist caliphate. Over to the U.S., where the Republican effort to replace Obamacare has kicked up another storm. Democrats have lashed out at the lack of women on a health care bill working group in the Senate. The 13-member working group put together by Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell does not include any of the chamber's 5 Republican women. Critics say the group's lack of diversity would eliminate crucial viewpoints. On Twitter, Democratic Senator Kamala Harris of California wrote, "The GOP is crafting policy on an issue that directly impacts women without including a single woman in the process. It's wrong." Meanwhile, former U.S. President Barack Obama is appealing to lawmakers to look beyond party lines when considering the country's healthcare system. Obama's comments came as he picked up the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation's Profile in Courage Award at a ceremony in Boston.
Today's members of Congress, regardless of party, are willing to look at the facts and speak the truth, even when it contradicts party positions. I hope they understand that courage means not simply doing what is politically expedient, but doing what they believe deep in their hearts is right.
And in a groundbreaking move, Cuba's LGBT community held its first transgender-led mass this weekend. The 3-day event was held in the western city of Matanzas. Transgender pastors from Brazil, Canada, and the U.S. led a diverse congregation to celebrate equality. This is a sign of progressiveness for a country where religion and anything but heterosexuality was seen out of step with the nation's values for decades. A wildfire in the Okefenokee Wildlife Refuge in Georgia has forced dozens of nearby residents to leave their homes. Authorities also say the blaze might not be fully contained for months. About 130,000 acres, or about a quarter of the refuge, have already burned. Most of the fire is within the refuge, straddling Georgia's southeast border with Florida. The wildlife refuge is home to black bears, alligators, and sandhill cranes. Over in eastern and central Canada, torrential rain has caused some of the worst flooding in decades. Quebec has called in military aid, with Environment Minister David Hertel describing the rainfall as historic. Montreal has declared a state of emergency to give firefighters extra resources to battle the flooding. And things got extra prickly when Mayor of Rigaud, Hans Grunwald, criticized flood victims who refused a mandatory evacuation order for crying like babies. The northwestern German city of Hanover had to evacuate about 10% of its population yesterday as it dealt with unexploded World War II bombs found on a construction site. Over 500,000 people had to leave their homes for what's believed to be the second largest bomb disposal operation in post-war Germany. Authorities had to carefully locate and remove a total of 13 unexploded bombs in an operation that, quote, kept escalating over weeks, according to a local resident. Now, what would you do if faced with trying to move a 40-ton whale? Well, residents on this beach, you're about to see it in Salina Cruz, Mexico, were faced with that exact problem. Tourists and residents gathered on the shore to evaluate how to shift the 49-foot-long mammal back into deep water. Fishermen in a motorboat pulled the whale into the sea from its tail, while others pushed its head. It took 4 hours before the whale was able to swim away on its own. And now the latest in sports news. And kicking off with German football to Bundesliga. Top teams have qualified for next season's Champions League. RB Leipzig crushed Hertha Berlin 4-1 to secure a Champions League group stage spot and a top 3 finish in the Bundesliga. Top scorer Werner took his league goal tally to 19. As second-place Leipzig moved up the Bundesliga table with 66 points. Meanwhile, Borussia Dortmund edged past Hoffenheim 2-1 over the weekend to move into third place with 2 matches left. They too have secured a spot in next season's Champions League group stage. To the Chinese Super League, and Guangzhou RNF were unseated over the weekend after a 3-0 loss to Shandong Luneng on Sunday. The opening goal came in the 14th minute with a diving header from Zhang Qi, who also scored the second goal 7 minutes later. Brazilian Diego Tardelli bagged the third and final goal in the second half. The result moved Shandong to third in the league, with Guangzhou RNF dropping down to the 4th. And that's a wrap of our news tonight. Thanks for joining us. You're watching ViuTV News. Have a great evening. Good night.
Coming up next.